The what if storyline is a staple in not just film, but narrative in general. In the case of It's a Wonderful Life, the what if George Bailey was never born idea is the main drive to the story. But just like in the film, It's a Wonderful Life may have never become the cherished Christmas classic if not for one tiny, simple mistake. The history of It's a Wonderful Life. On a cold night in February 1938, author Philip Van Doren Stern woke up with a dream that reminded him of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Taken by the dream, Stern wrote a short story about a man who decides to take his own life on Christmas Eve, and his guardian angel who comes to show him that he has everything he needs in life, titling this piece, The Greatest Gift. Stern spent nearly 4 years working on the piece, finally finishing it in 1943. Unfortunately, no publisher wanted to take the story, so instead, Stern sent copies of the story out to his friends and family as Christmas cards. Word spread as the story was passed around to great fanfare, and Reader's Scope, a literary magazine that existed in the 1940s, published the story. In 1944, Stern published the story as its own novella, and Good Housekeeping published the story, changing the title to The Man That Was Never Born. David Hempstead, a producer at RKO, saw the story and fell in love with it. Hempstead showed the story to Cary Grant, who also loved it and wanted to make the film. RKO then purchased the rights to The Greatest Gift for $10,000 with the intention for Cary Grant to star in it. Several writers were hired by RKO to draft a script based on the story. Dalton Trumbo was one writer hired, who expanded upon the main character, George, as to why he wanted to commit suicide. In Trumbo's script, George is a politician who lost an election and then chooses to commit suicide. RKO was dissatisfied with Trumbo's script and the other scripts turned in by the other writers, so RKO decided to put the film on hold. Upon returning from his service making war films for the War Department in World War II, Frank Capra started his own production company, Liberty Films, with fellow World War II filmmaker vets William Wyler and George Stevens. And Liberty Films had a production deal with RKO to produce 9 films for them. Upon the insistence of the studio chief Charles Corner, Capra read The Greatest Gift. Capra loved the story and had Liberty Films buy the rights from RKO for $10,000. Capra said years later that RKO actually sold him the rights for $50,000. The first thing Capra did with the rights to the film was remove Grant from the film. He also set out to rewrite the script from the many drafts written. Capra enjoyed the draft written by Clifford Odets the most, and used some of the scenes he had written for his own draft. Capra spent weeks writing and rewriting, bringing other writers on board to help him with the script, including Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett. Apparently, Goodrich and Hackett hated working with Capra, who was demanding and authoritarian, and once they finished writing the last scene of their final draft, they never spoke to Capra again. Other writers who came onto the project also experienced Capra's draconian regimen to writing, including Joe Swirling, who apparently reworked most of the work Goodrich and Hackett made. In these earlier drafts, scenes that were later changed included a different flashback when George saves his younger brother from drowning. The film's original ending had George give the Lord's Prayer, hoping God would forgive him for trying to commit suicide. But Capra felt that ending was overtly too religious. Capra said that the role of George Bailey could only be played by one man, James Stewart. Capra sent a copy to the script to Stewart's agent, and Stewart signed on to the film without reading a single word. Capra and Stewart had a history together, and he knew if Capra was directing it, it would be a success. But upon learning what the film was about, Stewart voiced his concern to Capra, stating the script didn't make much sense, but still trusted Capra. For the role of Mary, Jean Arthur was offered the role from Capra, also based on working with Capra in the past. But she couldn't take the role due to already committing to another project. Several other actresses were considered, who all turned down the role, with Ginger Rogers infamously calling the script too bland. Donna Reed eventually took the role. For the role of Mr. Potter, several actors were considered, before Lionel Barrymore was offered the role based on his performance as Ebenezer Scrooge in a radio version of A Christmas Carol. Liberty Films secured the film's budget at $3.7 million and spent 2 months building the town of Bedford Falls, which was built in the RKO Ranch, using the already built set by Max Rhee for the 1931 film Cimarron. Over 75 buildings and stores were constructed to create the town, and Capra insisted dogs and birds have access to the set to give the idea that the set was a living space. And filming began on April 15th, 1946. While it's a common myth that Bedford Falls is based on Seneca Falls, New York, where a yearly It's a Wonderful Life festival was held, as it was rumored that Capra visited the town for inspiration. However, according to film historian Janine Basinger, there are no notes indicating Capra ever visited Seneca Falls, and Stern, when writing The Greatest Gift, claimed he based Bedford Falls on Clifton, New Jersey. When filming moved to the summer months, Los Angeles experienced a record-breaking heat wave, which caused much agony on the hot set. In many instances, you could see Stewart sweating in the film. Capra even received pressure from much of the crew to shut down production until the heat wave ended, but they carried on. Filming was chaotic and costly as crew members quit the production without notice. George Stevens, Capra's partner with Liberty Films, expressed his concern that the production was just sinking money. Stevens even asked Capra if the film could take place in the springtime to help alleviate costs, with sets having to look like Christmas all the time. In one incident, in the flashback scene when Mr. Gower, owner of the pharmacy, confronts George and begins slapping him, the actor who played Mr. Gower, H.B. Warner, apparently slapped the actor playing George, Bobby Anderson, so hard that Bobby's ears bled. Once Warner saw Bobby crying, he realized he took it too far and apologized. Another incident came when Thomas Mitchell, who plays Uncle Billy, walked off the screen, as he was directed to, but then stumbled over camera equipment.
Right direction. What you do now, George? Right down. Old building and lone pal, huh?
Now you just turn this way, and then right straight down there.
Oh, that way, huh? My wild Irish road. I'm all right. I'm all right.
The character of Uncle Billy is supposed to be drunk, and Capra felt the unscripted bit added to the film, so he left it in. The film is famous for having 3 different director photographers. Victor Milner, the original cinematographer of the film, was fired shortly after filming began. Complaints against him that he took too long to light scenes and his ego clashed with the family-friendly atmosphere Capra wanted to capture. Joseph Walker was then brought on to finish the film. A few reshoots had to be done, but Joseph Walker could not commit, so Joseph Byrock came on board to finish them. Typically, creating snowflakes was made using cornflakes and were incredibly loud, requiring scenes to be dubbed over. To avoid this, the head of special effects for RKO, Russell Shearman, created what is referred to as chemical snow, a mixture of water, soap flakes, and sugar. This was less noisy and easier to film in. Filming wrapped on July 27, 1946, and quickly edited for a January release for 1947. RKO soon realized they didn't have a film slated for their Oscar calendar, and It's a Wonderful Life was the only film closest to move, so it was decided to release the film on December 20th, 1946. The Screenwriters Guild, or known as the Arbitration Committee, gave credit to Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett, despite most of their work being rewritten by Joe Swerling. Capra was furious, stating he was owed the sole writing credit for the film. Joe Swerling, upon hearing that he wouldn't be credited for writing the film, was furious with Capra, and he cut ties with Capra, refusing to speak to him for the rest of his life. The world premiere of It's a Wonderful Life occurred on December 20th, 1946 at the Globe Theatre in New York City. The reception was mixed at best. Most critics were split on the film. Some praised the film for its fantasy elements and uplifting message, while others loathed the film, feeling it fed into cheap emotional tricks to try and craft a childish picture. Critics were specific in their distaste for the film, criticizing the acting in particular, James Stewart's performance of George Bailey. They also attacked at the film's ideology of a town banding together to save George Bailey in the end, something they felt most Americans may have altruistic tendencies, but an entire town, they didn't buy it. The country was facing an existential crisis post-World War II and the Great Depression. Movies were used as a means to escape, but the horrors of the war and the atrocities committed by men haunted society as a whole. How something so horrible could ever happen in the first place. And Capra saw these horrors firsthand when he worked for the War Department. He heard stories from soldiers of the death camps Germany had constructed. His partner George Stevens saw Dachau firsthand during its liberation. These were things most people couldn't believe humanity had within them to commit, especially in this time frame, as people had an idea of atrocities committed by humanity in the past, but not in the modern era. So when Capra returned to America, the first film he makes is about the idea that no matter what hardships we face, our neighbors, our friends will always be on our side to help. Unfortunately, moviegoers and critics didn't share this idea, and when the film was released to the public on January 27, 1947, it earned just $3.3 million against its $3.7 million budget. RKO took a loss of $525,000 when It's a Wonderful Life finished its box office run. A year after It's a Wonderful Life's release, the FBI began looking into the idea that the filmmakers behind It's a Wonderful Life had been infiltrated by communists, as the fear of communists taking over Hollywood was just beginning to shape up and would eventually lead to the infamous HUAC investigation. The FBI cited that due to Lionel Barrymore's casting as a banker with no regard to people and their livelihood, it was a way for the filmmakers to instill the idea that bankers and capitalists were the enemy. In the end, nothing came from the FBI. It's a Wonderful Life was nominated for 5 Academy Awards, including Best Sound Recording, Best Film Editing, Best Director, Best Actor for James Stewart, and Best Picture, which it lost to The Best Years of Our Lives. The film did win a Technical Achievement Award for Russell Shearman's method to creating snowflakes. Capra followed It's a Wonderful Life with State of the Union in 1948 for Liberty Films. State of the Union was a moderate success, but wasn't the box office smash Capra had hoped it would be to save the production studio. In 1951, Paramount bought Liberty Films from Capra. Only 2 films were ever made at Liberty. The rights for It's a Wonderful Life transferred around to various entities until it landed at National Telefilm Associates, a company that would buy television shows and films for syndication. In 1974, a mistake was made when NTA filed to renew the copyright on It's a Wonderful Life. Due to this error, the film entered public domain. Realizing this error, TV stations across the country began showing It's a Wonderful Life during the holiday season as essentially free content and not having to pay royalties. The film then began to have a second life among viewers during the holiday season, where it was reviewed with fresh eyes, and people were quick to label It's a Wonderful Life a masterpiece, true cinema joy. Seeing as the resurgence of popularity of the film, the idea of colorizing It's a Wonderful Life was proposed at Capra by Wilson Merkel, who recently saw the positive response Cary Grant's 1937 Topper, which was the first black and white film to be colorized in 1985. Capra was enthusiastic at the idea upon seeing a 10-minute demo, and quickly agreed to colorizing It's a Wonderful Life on the condition they also colored 2 other films of his, Meet John Doe and Lady for a Day. But once it was aware that It's a Wonderful Life was in public domain and no profit could be made, they decided against it. Eventually, colorized versions of the film were made, and in 1989, both Capra and Stewart openly voiced their opposition to colorizing black and white films. In 1990, Stewart v. Abend reached the Supreme Court of the United States, which argued that an owner of any copyrighted material has exclusive rights to their derivative works. The case was about Cornell Woolrich's story, It Had to Be Murder, written in 1942. Woolrich sold the rights of the short story with the intention a film would be made. Eventually, in 1953, James Stewart bought the rights, which was then turned into Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window in 1954. But Woolrich died in 1968, and a literary agent named Sheldon Abend bought the rights to Woolrich's original story, who then sued Stewart when Rear Window started appearing on television. The court sided with Abend, which in turn had a ripple effect on any work used to create a derivative work from its source, and in this case, The Greatest Gift into It's a Wonderful Life. Republic Pictures, a studio that was known for westerns and serials in the 1950s, owned the rights to The Greatest Gift, as Republic and National Telefilm Associates merged in 1985, and from the court's decision, royalties were then paid to Republic from that point forward. In 1993, It's a Wonderful Life was released for the Windows Personal Computer on a CD-ROM, a first for a film, to be released this way. The CD-ROM had an assortment of features, including a script to follow along while watching the film. Criticisms towards the release were aimed at the poor video quality. Eventually, the idea of releasing films on CD were changed with the introduction of DVDs a few years later. It's a Wonderful Life has been adapted for radio and the stage numerous times, as well as been spoofed and paid homage in all kinds of media. In 1977, a TV film was remade to It Happened One Christmas. Changing the main character from George to Mary, it followed the original relatively close. The film was notable for casting Orson Welles as Mr. Potter, and having been shot by legendary cinematographer Conrad Hall. The film premiered on December 11, 1977, and was incredibly popular, but critics felt mixed by it. Capra wrote a scathing review of the film in the New York Times, denouncing the film. ABC has only re-aired the film twice, in 1978 and 1979. The film has never been released on any home video format. In 1990, Clarence, another TV film, following George's guardian angel, was made. The film was crafted to be a sequel to It's a Wonderful Life, following Clarence helping out another person on hard times contemplating suicide. The film aired on November 24, 1990 on the Family Channel to poor reviews. Another sequel has been in the works for years, following George Bailey's grandson, who grows up to be mean and cold-hearted. His guardian angel is then sent to show him what life would be like if he was never born. However, the producers associated with this new sequel never obtained either the rights or permission from Paramount, who have been outspoken about the film. There is a common misconception that the creator of Sesame Street named the characters Bert and Ernie after the characters Bert and Ernie from It's a Wonderful Life, but that's simply a coincidence. It's a Wonderful Life still remains an endearing holiday classic decades after its release, and through its yearly television screenings that created a new audience for this beloved film. It might have never happened if not for a simple clerical error made in 1974. Thanks for watching.